Welcome to the season 3 finale of Crippled by Culture, where we talk about everything in life and related to the disabled and chronically ill community. My name is Sean Gold, and I'm an author, advocate, nonverbal public speaker for the disability community. To give a quick description for accessibility, I'm a Black man with a white tracheostomy breathing tube in my neck. The person off camera is who you hear speaking for me. This video is of a Zoom call with me and the person talking off camera. And my guest is the other person's, or my guest is in the other box next to it. Before we jump in, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Josh Rettig for being my voice transcriber this episode. Thank you very much. My pleasure. Today we're talking about the intersections of disability, interabled marriage, and parenting, and I'm very excited for this. So let's get into it and meet today's awesome guest. Winston Ben Clements is a former software engineer turned motivational speaker and accessibility consultant. Living with osteogenesis imperfecta, he delivers impactful keynote speeches for Fortune 500 companies and co-creates the Clements social media brand with his wife Mayfair. He has delivered 2 TEDx talks and has been featured on Good Morning America, BBC, and The Today Show. Winston's mission is to normalize disability and help build inclusive workplaces worldwide. All right, Winston, thank you for being here today. I'm a big fan of you and your family on YouTube. It's an honor to meet you. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me here.
Would you mind giving a visual description of yourself?
Yeah, I am a Black man who happens to be a little person, so I'm about 3 feet tall. Also, I use a power wheelchair, which you might be able to kind of see in the background. And today I am wearing I would say peach t-shirt with some gray pants which are not visible in the frame.
I appreciate that. This first question might be a bit silly after the introduction, but do you identify as having a disability? And if so, do you mind sharing what it is?
Yes, so I do identify as a person with a disability. My condition, like you mentioned, is called osteogenesis imperfecta, which is a long medical term which I don't expect people to remember, but what it means is that my bones develop differently to the average person. So, like I shared, I am much smaller than the average person, so I'm a little person because of how my bones have developed. And then also, my bones are more fragile than the average person's too. So, up to now, I have fractured probably over 200 times. And so, it has a profound impact on my mobility and how I navigate this beautiful world of ours.
How does it affect your like day-to-day life, like your routines and stuff like that?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing for me is physical access to things. So because I am smaller and also because, like I said, I use a power chair, but then I also have limited reach, for example. I think most of the impact of my condition is just how I access the built environment, and physical spaces, whether that's at home or in the workplace or, transportation. So the big thing for me when thinking about going to different places is just trying to make sure that it's accessible. There's an accessible way into the building. At home, my wife does a great job of arranging our space to make sure that I can reach and access everything. So if I want to grab something from the fridge or if I want to make myself a drink, making sure that all of that stuff is within reach for me. And then in the workplace, I mostly work from home nowadays, unless I'm speaking on stage. So just making sure that my own environment is accessible, and sometimes that requires use of different types of technologies and AI tools, just to kind of help me, be more productive. So one thing I really enjoy using is voice controlled, you know, platforms and systems because that allows me to speak the things that I want to do instead of having to type because I'm not as good typing as I am speaking. So those are just some of the ways that I can think of right now.
So you said you get fractures more often. Do they also take longer to heal than someone without your condition?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably about the same if I was to guess, although I haven't got any data to prove this. Um, I think the challenge is the frequency of the fractures. So, you know, the average person, in fact, most people who I know have never experienced a fracture. And maybe if they have, it's once or twice when they were playing sports or something. But for me, the challenge was, especially when I was younger, the fractures would happen almost, through no contact at all. Um, Something as simple as sneezing or coughing could cause me to fracture my ribs or, you know, rolling over when I was really small could cause me to have an arm fracture or a leg fracture. So I think it was more the frequency than, how long it takes to heal that was the biggest challenge because yeah, before I'd recovered from one fracture, I'd probably already experienced another one. So the spacing wasn't there for me to actually enjoy having, some time without fractures, if that makes sense.
Uh, how old were you when you were diagnosed?
So from birth, so this is a condition which nowadays they're able to diagnose even during pregnancy. I was born a long time ago in the 80s before they had that kind of technology, but I was pretty much diagnosed, on day one because I already had some experience on fractures during the birth itself.
Do you feel like there have been things that are not diagnosed,
As far as
like other disabilities, is like
for me, or just generally speaking.
for you, I guess.
So far, I only identify as having osteogenesis imperfecta. I don't have any lived experience with any other disability. So for me, my diagnosis took place, like I said, you know, when I was born and I had these fractures, and so they were able to eventually figure out this was happening because of my OI diagnosis. But OI is also very different in how it presents itself. So not everyone with OI, for example, is a little person. Not everyone with OI uses a power chair. Some people with OI are able to walk, for example, and they're able to grow into an average sized body. So it's very, very different. So that people may have different stories and experiences for how they received their diagnosis. But for me, it was at the point of birth when they discovered all the fractures that I had.
Have you had to go through your own internalized ableism?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Um, uh,
yeah.
and how has that journey been towards that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one with internalized ableism because it's kind of it's not, at least for me, if I speak for myself, it's not something that you are aware that you're experiencing until maybe someone points it out to you or until later on when you're able to look back and see that some of your behavior and your thinking was driven by internalized ableism. I think for me, the internalized ableism shows up because I think it's still something that I'm figuring out. I don't think you fully get over internalized ableism because it comes from having to navigate a world that isn't designed for people with disabilities. And so, because the world is not designed for people with disabilities, you then have to adapt yourself to a world that is not catered to you. And that can then bring up internalized ableism because you're constantly having to accept things which you shouldn't be accepting, right? And that's a big part of internalized ableism. An example for me is even going into my first corporate job and working for a big global company. And this is a simple example, but they gave me a workstation with a desk which wasn't at the right height for me. And, for the type of organization that I was working for, that would have been a simple change for them to give me a new desk or, one of those fancy height adjustable desks that it wasn't a case of they couldn't afford to do it or they wouldn't do it. Um, but in that situation, internalized ableism showed up for me because I just thought, I don't want to ask. I don't want to be a burden to anyone through asking. I'm just grateful to have a job. And so I tried to make it work with something that wasn't fully accessible for me. And so it's only, like I said, later when I look back and through speaking to other disabled people and realizing that, hey, you know what? You do have a right to accessibility, just like someone who is non-disabled, right? So yeah, that's one of the clear examples of how it showed up for me. So even now, I'm constantly thinking or trying to be aware of, just being a better advocate, not just for myself, but for other people, because the world doesn't really give disability permission to do that.
So you never asked for the accommodations for as long as you worked.
So in that scenario, I tried to adapt myself to the environment for I can't remember how long it was, but it was for a period of time. And then it got to a point where I I think someone noticed that a colleague of mine noticed that the desk wasn't really working for me. And so I was referred to what they call occupational health. And then they were able to quickly come and do a workstation review. And of course, during that review, one of their recommendations was, he needs a new desk and he needs a few other things to make his space more accessible. And that was taken care of within a matter of days from the time we started that conversation. So, so yeah, which is why, like I was sharing just now, I'm super passionate about, you know, helping other people advocate for themselves because sometimes as disabled people, we kind of need that permission, for someone to say, hey, it's okay for you to put your hand up and say that this isn't working for you. And so from that point on, I've been able to be more aware and more vocal about any accessibility accommodations that I might need.
Moving to your involvement in the disabled community, uh, what made you want to become a public speaker?
I actually didn't want to become a public speaker. It kind of happened. Yeah, I kind of just landed here accidentally in a way. So like I shared, my previous career was in the tech industry. I majored in computer science. I worked as a programmer for about 9 or 10 years for different companies, a lot of them global companies. And so that's where I thought I would finish my career working in the tech industry. Um, but it was during my time in the tech industry, it kind of came about from as I climbed up the corporate ladder, I realized that I was having to talk to people more, right? And one of my least favorite things to do was actually give presentations or run meetings or things like that. So as I was climbing up and this was being required of me more and more, I thought I would explore a way to build up my confidence in public speaking. And so I joined something called Toastmasters, which you may have heard of, but it's a public speaking meetup where you get to practice in front of a small group. And so the original idea was for me to just develop some confidence that I could then bring back to my day job when I was presenting and when I was running meetings for my tech career. Um, but what actually happened was I started to enjoy it a lot, the public speaking that I was doing on the side, outside of work. And I eventually met with a mentor who basically helped me realize that I had a story that could help a lot of people. And then, long story short, he ended up encouraging me to apply for a TED Talk, which I didn't want to do, but he really persisted with asking me to do it. So in the end, I just did it, hoping that I would never hear back from them and that this guy would leave me alone. But of course, it was one of those situations where I ended up being invited to do the TED presentation. And from doing the TED presentation, it got posted on YouTube, on the TED Talks YouTube channel. And through the visibility that I gained or that my talk gained online, I then had companies reaching out to me saying, hey, Winston, we found you on TED Talks. Would you like to come and speak to our team or, speak to our, young people or whatever the group was? And so kind of accidentally, I started doing this public speaking thing on the side while still doing my day job as a programmer. And then eventually it just got to a point where I was loving, sharing my story and speaking about advocacy and sharing my story about my disability and things that I've learned working in a corporate career, that I just decided to jump ship and do that full time. So it wasn't something that was calculated from the beginning, but just something that was revealed to me over time the more I explored the public speaking thing.
I actually had a similar experience. I didn't know that I wanted to be a speaker. I also wanted to do web design in the IT field, kind of got thrown into it. Do you still do IT outside of your own video editing?
Nope.
Hmm.
Not really. I mean, I still have a interest in IT and, even in my own business as a speaker and, the content creation that my wife and I do. I'm always trying to figure out ways to do things using technology or to use AI, tools nowadays just to make things easier. Um, so I have a natural interest in IT and tools anyway, but I wouldn't say I am in that field in the same way that I was, 8 years ago now.
Or were you doing any coding?
Yeah, back then I was doing coding, yeah.
Uh, well, how long have you been speaking and what do you usually talk about?
Yeah, so I've been speaking probably full time since 2020, 2019, 2020. So it's been about 7 years full time. And then before that, like I said, I was kind of doing it half time. Sorry, not half time, part time, um, alongside my IT career that I had.
Have you ever gotten any pushback when talking about subjects that can make non-disabled people uncomfortable? And how do you respond to stuff like that?
Um, I can't really say I've gotten pushback. I think, and you know this as well, Sean. I think when you're on the stage, generally, I think people, in my experience, they are rooting for the speaker to do well when they're on the stage, right? They want to see, nobody wants to see a speaker, have a tough time and lose their train of thought or forget their words or anything like that. I think generally people are quite positive about speakers and quite supportive. I think in terms of pushback, I would say for me, the biggest pushback is actually the invisible pushback. So if I'm speaking about, let's say, accessibility and how you could be more supportive of disabled team members, disabled employees. So for me, the biggest pushback is it's not someone, standing up in the audience and saying, no, Winston, you're wrong. I don't agree with anything you're saying. For me, the biggest pushback is them going back to their teams and not doing anything with the information that I've shared, right? Um, because I would almost rather someone stood up and challenged me while I was on the stage, and then we could have a conversation about it, right there and figure it out, than for someone to just be like nodding and then go back and do nothing with the information, or they don't become a better ally to that disabled colleague, or they don't develop any empathy um, or anything that helps to move the needle forward for disability equality. So for me, that's the main purpose of speaking, to be able to move that needle forward. It's not really about me or my story or, you know, for me to be the most interesting or the most entertaining speaker. It's what are you going to do with the information?
So your speaking engagements, were they mainly corporate and business?
Yeah, at this point, it's mainly corporate groups. I do sometimes get to speak with young people, which I really enjoy. So people in colleges, especially, where maybe they have like a community for students with different types of disabilities. I've spoken at a few of those before. And then, of course, outside my, I guess, keynote speaking, there's all the content that my wife and I create for YouTube, which is available publicly to anyone.
Do you still get nervous before your events?
Yeah, I do, I do. Yeah, I would say I don't know if nervous is the right word, but it's almost like a good kind of nervousness because I know I'm about to do something, that's meaningful and that's important, and I need to be at my best. Maybe kind of like an athlete who's getting ready to, I don't know, play an NBA game. Even though they've played maybe hundreds of games before that, you still kind of need to get in the zone and focus and, you know, yeah, feel that sense of adrenaline because you know you're about to perform and there's going to be people watching and you hope that you can make an impact. So it's that kind of nervousness, not the debilitating one where, I'm scared to go on the stage or something like that.
Well, I love seeing the weekly videos of you and your daughter on YouTube and seeing her grow. So how is she?
Yeah, she's good. She's having a great time. She's 4 years old now. Yeah, just living her best 4-year-old life.
Uh, how did you and your wife decide to parent her before she was born?
So I think we just knew, like, even from the time when we were dating each other before we got married, one of the things that we spoke about was, do we want to be parents one day? And we both were of the same opinion that we did. She wanted to be a mother someday. I wanted to be a father someday. We didn't know when it was going to happen or, if it was going to happen because not everyone gets the opportunity to be a parent. Um, but we were definitely hoping to be, and we were super blessed when we found out that we would be having a child. And yes, so far we really enjoyed the journey of parenthood.
How did becoming a father change your outlook on your own disability?
Change my outlook. I would say I think yeah, I think becoming a father, definitely what I would say is it gives you a bigger sense of purpose and responsibility to your family. So it becomes less and less about you and more about, you know, your children, of course, but also your wife and your family. And so for me, I guess how that impacted my disability specifically, it just made me want to be a good role model for her, and give her a positive representation of, what disability means, in a healthy way, not necessarily what we see in the media that disability is this dirty word or it equals a life of pure hardship, but more to show her that, yeah, things might look a bit different, but your dad is also able to, you know, do a bunch of stuff, provide for the family, play with you, um, travel with you, pick you up from school, all of these things. And for her just to grow up knowing that, yeah, disability doesn't mean incapability, if that makes sense.
Did you have any doubts or internalized ableism about your disability, about becoming a disabled father?
Yeah, I mean, that's always there. Like I said, I don't know if that ever fully goes away. So every situation that's new, or maybe where you haven't maybe seen lots of examples of people with disabilities doing the thing that you're about to do, then that can show up as anxiety, as internalized ableism. Um, and so, yeah, there were moments like that because I didn't really have like a ton of examples of people who look exactly like me who were building this life with a family and being present fathers and being able to play with their kids and all the stuff that I wanted to do. So I think that was a part of me that was like, ooh, I don't know what's gonna be possible and not possible. Um, and so I had to kind of build my own evidence, right? Because the evidence wasn't out there necessarily. So I had to, when our daughter arrived, I had to first of all figure out, our dynamic, how to hold her, how to play with her, how to feed her. And then just through that figuring out, you then start to develop some confidence and the internalized ableism gets less and less with time because now you know that, hey, even if this is something that is new, um, you have the evidence that you've been able to figure things out with your family, with your kid in the past. And so whatever lies ahead in the future, you could probably figure that out too, if that makes sense.
What's your favorite thing about being a father?
Um, Honestly, I love all of it. But I would say it's actually a very interesting shift. I don't know if you've experienced it yourself or maybe you've had nieces and nephews, but 1 minute, it's just you, and then the next minute there's another person in your space, right? Like yeah, like to this day, sometimes I look at her and think, where did you come from? Because you were not here 4 years ago. Um, and I think that's just really cool, like having a new person in your life that you get to see every day and, build up a friendship with as she grows up, teach her things, like now she's 4, she's getting to the age where she's really curious about what we do. She's wants to be in the YouTube video. She wants to speak to the camera. Um, she asks lots of questions, and yeah, it's just getting to know a whole new person. I would say that's my favorite part.
You're very open with your life online, especially your marriage. As another Black disabled man who hopes to build a family someday, I really appreciate that visibility. What made you both decide to share your relationship so openly?
Yeah, good question. I think again, it wasn't super intentional or by design necessarily. I think when we got married, we shared our wedding video, or it might have been the engagement video was one of the first videos that we shared when I proposed to my wife. Um, and initially we had just posted that video because we wanted to have it on YouTube just for memories and to be able to share it with family and friends and, look back on. Um, but then what we realized is, our videos started being viewed by a lot of people. Um, and we started to get a lot of comments, and among those comments, there were a lot of questions because maybe we're not the typical Instagram couple that people see or the typical couple that people see on social media. And so I think it was when we started getting these types of questions of, why did she choose to marry a guy with a disability, for example? Or is she going to have to be his full-time carer? Or is he rich? Is that why she's married him? So all of these questions, which were kind of rooted in ableism and maybe stereotypes that people have about disability, I think that was the first time when we thought, hey, like maybe we need to be creating content that actually shows disability in a more positive way. And so that's how it kind of started. And this was about 5 years ago, which is when we got married, and we've just kept, consistently creating videos and sharing our lives in a very normal way. We don't try to sensationalize anything. We'll just show you a typical day in the life, or if we travel somewhere, we'll show you how we travel, how we do things together as a family, with my wife being non-disabled, I being, disabled, and then now with the added dynamic of having a child. And yeah, just with the hope that it might also help inspire other people who have disabilities that, they too can have that kind of life. Because like I said, for me growing up, I didn't see many examples of that. Um, and so if I can be that for someone else, then, or my family can be that for someone else, then I think that that will help a lot, the next generation.
Yeah, my niece is 4, and it's amazing to see how easy they can get used to disability faster than older kids and even some adults. She's
Yeah.
still learning to understand me since I'm not speaking, but it's been the best.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, kids are really, in my experience, really intuitive. They really know how to just interact with people as they are. They don't try to make any assumptions or change you, or, you know, think you should be speaking this way instead of that way, or moving this way instead of that way. They just kind of meet you where you are. They might have some questions because they're curious, but outside of that, I find that the quicker that we're able to get kids familiar with disability, then hopefully they will grow up to be the advocates and the allies of the next generation.
Was it hard for you to get on board with doing the channel full time?
Um, we didn't really. It's interesting because both my wife and I come from corporate careers. So for me, when I hear full time, I just think of like the 60-hour weeks I used to do in the corporate world, and same for my wife. So now that we're able to do other things, in our own business, so the speaking for me, and then the social media that we do together, it still doesn't feel like full time, even though it technically is, because that's all that we do. It doesn't really have that heaviness of a full-time job in a way. So the adjustment was definitely manageable. And I think it also helps when you're doing something that's really meaningful to you and that you're really passionate about, because, it's like that saying that says something like, do work that you love and you'll never work a day in your life, or something like that, right? Because when something is so aligned with your values, and your mission and your purpose, you could just keep going. It doesn't even feel like work.
You've discussed this in your videos from time to time. How do you deal with ableism and trolls?
Um, by not dealing with them, to be honest. So for us, we realized that, I guess the first thing is to acknowledge that it is challenging, because not just, myself, because maybe more public and talking about my disability more publicly. Um, but even people with disabilities who are not on social media may experience the ableism and the trolling on a day-to-day basis, even though it might look different. It could just be, for example, being, I don't know, and this has happened to me as well, when I was younger and in college. We would go out, to the club, me and my friends, and there's been times when, we've been turned away because the venue said, no, we can't have your friend who's in a wheelchair because he's a fire risk, they said, right, to come into the club or to the venue. Um, So for me, that's kind of like real life, ableism, real life discrimination. Um, and so I think the way that we've dealt with it online is because online, people feel bolder, like people feel like they can say things to you online that they wouldn't even say to you in person, right? Because they can be anonymous and they can hide behind the keyboard. Um, but what we do is just try to have boundaries. We don't, for example, read every single comment on our videos. We have people that help us out with that. We have an amazing social media manager. And so we do reply to comments here and there, but we also have boundaries so that we're not having to review each and every comment and taking in all the mean comments as well. Because that can have an impact on your mental health if you're constantly reading stuff that's unkind, especially if it's about you or your spouse or your family. That's tough to deal with every day, right? Um, so that's one thing that we've been doing. And then I guess just maintaining the bigger picture as well, remembering why we're doing this, to have that representation so that the next generation of people who have disabilities can have, you know, something positive, hopefully, to aspire to. Um, and having that in mind, having that as a North Star is helpful because even when you do see a mean comment or a trolling comment, then you know that that's whatever, that's not as important as me putting out this content that might help someone, it might give someone the hope to keep going that day, if that makes sense. And so yeah, it's tricky. And you know, some days you just have to also give yourself permission not to be online, take a social media break. If you need to not post that week, just to give yourself a mental health break, that's okay too. So it's kind of a bunch of different strategies just to make sure that you're not becoming overwhelmed by the content creation.
Yeah, honestly, it doesn't really make sense to say that just being at a club is a fire hazard. That's just weird, honestly.
Yeah.
But anyways, I really admire how you and Maeve openly share your faith and talk about Christ being at the center of your marriage. When you were dating, how did you know she was the one? And did prayer like play any role in that?
Yeah, so we tried to have a lot of the big conversations during the time that we dated. So we dated for about, I want to say maybe 8 months or so before we got engaged. And so during that time, we really tried to be intentional about talking about everything, our beliefs, our values, hard conversations about anything, how the disability could impact us, our extended family, how it could impact us when we eventually have children. So we just really tried to get ahead of a lot of those conversations. Um, and so, of course, during that season, discovering that we were both Christians and we were both aligned as far as our faith, I think that was a very big, like, check mark for us. Because we both wanted to marry or to have a spouse who was aligned from a spiritual perspective. Um, and so yeah, to your point, yeah, so things like prayer and going to church and reading the Bible were things that are fundamental to us as a couple because they were already fundamental to us as individuals. Um, and so that made it a much more seamless match for us.
Well, I just want to say that from one black disabled man to another, I thank you for the representation and visibility. I watch your videos pretty much every week, always leave me with more hope about the future. You, Mayfair, and Lega are bringing me so much happiness and joy. I really appreciate. Was
Yeah.
there? Oh, sorry.
Mhm. No, I was gonna say thank you so much for watching, and actually, it's good to see another man, and especially a black man who watches our videos, because when we look at the analytics on the back end, I think 90% of our audience is female. So sometimes I'm always thinking, I wonder who are the 10% of men that are watching. So it's good to finally meet one of you. Um, and yeah, I'm glad that the videos are helpful in some way. And I know that you, Sean, also you do a bunch of stuff supporting this community as well through your writing and through your podcast. So I appreciate you for that too.
Is there anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to, or any questions for me?
Um, I really enjoyed this conversation, to be honest. And I would definitely love to probably do a part two at some point because we have some big things coming up in the future. I know we're definitely thinking about writing a book soon-ish, so it could be good to come back, when the book is ready and we can talk about that too. But yeah, overall, I really appreciate you being open to having this conversation, inviting me to meet your community. And yeah, I will say maybe as my final thing to share with your audience is, yeah, I think it seems like we touched a few times on that point of internalized ableism. And so I imagine that there's someone who's listening to this who maybe feels like they're being held back because of a disability. Um, and to that person, I would say, first of all, acknowledge that it is tough because, the world in a way is not designed for you to thrive. And so you really have to be intentional about finding things that give you that boost of energy to keep going. And hopefully, by discovering disabled leaders and creators, and it could even be just someone in your community who is doing something that you want to do. Um, and just really connecting yourself to those positive stories for me has been one of the biggest ways to keep myself inspired, keep myself energized, to take the next step because yeah, it can be tough out there when you feel like you're always swimming against the current. So definitely, follow me online, follow Sean online as well. And hopefully we can point you to other great people in our community who you should follow as well.
Thank you for coming on and talking with me. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too, and I appreciate all of your insights. Uh, see, again, if people want to connect with you or support you, where can they find you?
Yeah, probably the two places would be one, my Instagram, which is Winston Speaker, just one word. And then the second place would be my website, which is winstonclements.com. And there you'll find all my speaking work and a bunch of free resources that I share with my community.
Make sure everything is linked in the description below. Again, I'm Sean Gold. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to hit the bell so you're notified when new episodes go live. See you next season.
Want to listen to Crippled by Culture on your favorite podcast platform? Well, now you can. Crippled by Culture is now available wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search up the show title and make sure you subscribe. Thank you for being a listener.